overwhelmingly Muslim populations, with Gaza at around 99.8% and Sudan at around 97%. And yet, Sudan barely makes an imprint on the news. We know that there are Muslim populations throughout the world, many of whom we have never heard of, populations that we have forgotten or simply do not care enough about for us to check up on their condition from time to time. This is a harsh reality that we know many a time just based on our ethnicity of large Muslim populations in countries like India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Malaysia and the Arab states. But how many of us have come across, for example, the Muslim Tatars of Crimea? How many of us know about the Muslims of East Turkestan or the Uyghur Muslims? We have in recent years perhaps learned a bit more about the Rohingya or the Muslims of occupied Kashmir or the Muslims of India as a result of the Hindutva-led attacks. But we also ought to look much more closely at Sudan. And by not doing so, we are doing them a grave injustice. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very warm welcome to this webinar simulcast taking place across various Muslim media platforms throughout South Africa. It's brought to you by the United Ulama Council, or Uucsa of South Africa. My name is Ibrahim Musa, and I am your host for the next hour as we go through important information that needs to be shared with the community relating to the devastating situation in Sudan. We welcome audiences across CII Radio, Radio Islam International, IFM, Voice of the Cape, the Sirius FM, and Al Ansar Radio, as well as Salam Media. Welcome to all of you on the special broadcast as we take you step by step through what we need to know and what we need to do about Sudan. We will be joined during this broadcast a bit later on by Ibrahim Fakude. He is political analyst and senior research fellow at AfriSaid. But for now, to kick off our discussion and to take us through the motions is Professor Saifuddin Dawood Abdulrahman. He is a Sudanese economist, MP, and chief economist at the Debus Group. Professor Saifuddin, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to this broadcast and webinar.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Mr. Ibrahim, and pleasure to join your webinar today.
Thank you so much for joining us, and obviously we reach out to yourselves as members of the Sudanese nation, as members of the wider Ummah, to be able to give us guidance. This is definitely not the first time audiences that are joining us this evening have been exposed to Sudan. There have been numerous interviews with a variety of personalities from Sudan, but it was the responsibility of a ulama body within South Africa to be able to put this issue in sharp focus this evening and dedicate an entire hour across all our platforms. And this is where we seek to perhaps take ourselves back. Anybody not understanding what is occurring in Sudan, put us in the picture, but also touch on deeper issues that perhaps are not covered in ordinary news broadcasts. Let's ask you for a start, Dr. Saifuddin, if you could just emphasize for us why this should be considered one of those big hot button issues that should be right up our agenda as Muslims in general, as human beings, as fellow members of the African continent as
well. Once again, thank you, Mr. Musa. In fact, I'm not sure from where to give you a very brief historical background about the driver of the conflict, so that for the benefit of your audience, and then we will see what is the implications as for the Ummah and for the continental body, and what went wrong and what's supposed to to change in this tragedy.
All right, so let's just break it down. If you would want to do that for us, there's various historical phases, and I don't think the history of Sudan since its independence is insignificant. We have to, perhaps touch on all of that and the division of Sudan to be able to understand where we are today. But cutting that aside for a moment, just give us the background from 2023 and let's perhaps take it a bit before that. I think it's important to talk about the revolution, the fall of Umar al-Bashir, and that entire timeline leading us up till where we are today. A synopsis of it.
No, that's why exactly that what is the point that I just want to put you on that perspective, on that context. Before the falling of al-Bashir, Sudan is deeply rooted in political failure between civilians and military. Both they failed to deliver what is supposed to be delivered as a state. And one among big failure is that we have all these government crises coming and within the different military or civilians at the same time. After the falling of al-Bashir, there was a transitional period led by civilians, but it still was hybrid between the civilians and the military. These civilians it's supposed to end up the transitional period with the elections, so that we have a proper elected civilian government. So that was exactly the process. Unfortunately, there was a rocky transitions competing between the power between the civilians and the army at the same time, between the army and the paramilitary RSF, which is a rapid support force themselves. So you can see there are so many actors within the conflict. It's before even the conflict starts. That's what complicated the transitional period. So it is basically is a power struggle in the shape of different clauses. That is what I can just summarize it on that context. At the end, there was a division between the military and the paramilitary. The paramilitary itself, RSF, was part of the military created by the former al-Bashir in his time. So it became a parallel army in the country. It was very difficult to manage, and it was become part of all these crises during the transitions. The military was not able to handle the transitional period also very well. The civilians themselves also share part of the. So the both parties share the blame of all these consequences in a manner that the transitional period was not smooth. There was part of the United Mission also to support the transition put it, and the mission itself become part of the challenge, ending up in this brutal crisis.
And talking about the brutal crisis that obviously has gripped the headlines or has not gripped the headlines sufficiently, but fortunately, in the last few weeks, there's been much more significant focus on this humanitarian crisis. It's seen devastation, widespread devastation across such important centers, including Khartoum. It's seen all kinds of illegal munitions used. It's seen starvation. And it's seen most significantly one of the largest, or if not the largest, displacement crisis currently in the world. Just bring us up to speed then with the humanitarian crisis and the scale of this humanitarian crisis.
Again, if we go back, the root causes, it is important that always to highlight some of those root causes in the conflict. When there's some rebellious movement in Darfur in 2003, that is the time where this RSF was created. At that time, they call it border management. And then it is escalating from horse to the level that we have seen. So the humanitarian crisis, it was there always in Sudan in 2003, 2004, continuously up to the current humanitarian crisis that we have seen, particularly the outcry in Al-Fashir. The brutality of the war in a very Muslim community sometimes bring a shame. I'm saying this word simply because the world, what they have seen, it is something horrible. Nobody can expect that something for a Muslim country like that to see this kind of all atrocities. We have seen the same issue in 2005 when there was a peace agreement between Sudan and South Sudan, which now is a country. There was accusation that it is about Muslim, Christian, and that was not the correct. It was about governor crisis. And at that time, I was part of the post-transition team in dealing with these issues. So we have expecting that after the peace agreement, there was three scenarios. One scenario, Sudan will remain the same, with improve in the governance and then inclusivity, inclusive politics. The second scenario was there will be a separation, so Sudan will become a country, Sudan will be another country. The third scenario was, which was unfortunate, we are going to have two countries, two fragile countries in the fragility, so that they have not addressed the root causes of the problem. So the North will become North country with its own problem. South Sudan is struggling now with the same problem. Is that so? There was no. I can say it was only what we call it negative peace, a situation where there is no peace, no war, and that at the end just creating another layer for another war. And when the war broke in Sudan, people were saying, "What happened in Sudan?" We are assuming that it was war between Christian and Muslims between South and North, but now the war broke within the Muslim community, and then the Muslim community, you can see how it has become too brutal to the extent that nobody can imagine.
And in amidst all of this, whenever we talk about Sudan, Doctor, there is the issue of resources, there's the issue of geopolitics. I guess we'll talk about the proxies one step later from this, but Sudan just generally, through its history, has always gathered attention internally and externally, and more recently because of its access to the Red Sea, because of its location in Africa, because of the Nile River, and because of other resources. Talk to us about how that
Mm.
uh, is fueling the conflict.
Definitely, absolutely. This is one of the major factor. It is not only in Sudan. When you look to the situation in DRC and other countries that we call them resource-rich countries, it's become a curse for those countries. In fact, Sudan also facing the same challenge of not able to managing its resources. There is always interference, according to its geopolitics, the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. Sudan is a major corridor for global trade through the canal and Suez canals and all this. Sudan is rich by its own resources, and I am very recently wrote a book, and we see why in Africa there is a habit that when you see the country in crisis, you are never feeling with joy, because they enjoy your own resources. They believe that you are in crisis now. It's for them the time to enjoy your own resources that they have done and access. And this foreign interference, unfortunately, even our organization, the African Union, is not able to name and shame. We know those who are interfering in the continent now become another layer of the colonial, a new emerging power, middle power coming to the continent quietly. It is happening in Sudan. And if your neighbor in Sudan, we have a proverb saying that if you're never unfair, you should always be prepared. So people, they prefer that it is in Sudan, but it will not stop in Sudan in my own analysis, because this is now become a new normal, unfortunately, for the country. Sudan strategically, but unfortunately, has a big problem with its own elites. Elites are just become part of the historical crisis, to the point now we are in. We don't know where we are heading with these fragmentations. We have seen the fragmentation to the extent that you cannot even believe Sudanese among themselves cannot sit together and to be facilitated by other actors who they have their own interests, who are supporting the military, those who are supporting the RSF, those who are supporting the civilians. And some of them, they believe that Sudan should continue, just become a fragile like that, and so then they can lose the resources.
Now, talking about that, Doctor, you have this conflict generally being characterized as being between the SAF and the RSF. Uh, but would you say it is as simple as that? Is it this internal battle for power with all its historical factors, or is this dictated externally through now the proxy warfare that's taking place, and you could obviously expand on that. The role of Saudi Arabia, the role of Egypt, the role of the United Arab Emirates, the
Commitments.
role of Russia, etc., etc. Is it the interference of the external powers that is fueling the conflict, and without that external influence, this conflict would be resolved in a day? Or does this also require very serious internal Sudanese dialogue for it to be this conflict to end?
I worked before in Liberia and other conflict countries, and whenever there is a very simple conflict in the country, it will always attract a foreign interference. In Sudan, foreign interference is always there. There is because once you become a polarized society, uh, Sudan is supposed to benefit from its polarity. Sudan is a polar society with different cultural, very rich cultural backgrounds. Horizontal social contract is fantastic, but in some cases, in many ways, in Sudan, the conflict itself manipulated by the state. Is the state through history of us of the country. The conflict is always manipulated by the state or by the government at that time in any of the states. So we have very good social contract. We say the social fabric is the base of our development. Even during this humanitarian crisis, we have seen that Sudanese themselves stood, and they are the one who are always providing financial social protection support to the families for those who are unreached by all this noise, humanitarian noise. Sudanese are really social solidarity is very strong on that. But the major problem we have it as a Sudanese, always we have these kind of polarizations. Sudanese are very weak for the foreign interference. And then we have this kind of the polarizations. We have seen South supported by Emirates and other countries that were in that line. So the country become a testing ground even for new arms, unfortunately. This is what I can say. So this polarization is complicating the scenes. The same situation we have seen it before in Lebanon. We see Lebanon, they have different partition groups, despite the fact that so you see that Lebanon is also under so much influence between in the Gulf, in the beyond the Gulf, Iran's and others. So that's happening now in Sudan to put the civilians themselves now together so that they can lead in this kind of the conflict become an issue because the civilians themselves become polarized between the RSF and between Sudan military force. So this polarization continues, and there is no credible so far dialogue between all this. Only hope that we have it now. We have this, we call it the court meetings in the court group, which is Emirate, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. So those and US, four countries they are leading all this process. But at the same time, Sudan is say those countries, some of them involved in the conflicts itself. So how can they be part of the conflict and can be part of the solutions? And or so it's a bit contradictory, very contradictory to the extent that it is very hard to understand. Some of those who are engaged in the group also will be part of the solutions. And other regional organizations like African Union, IGAD, and others, unfortunately, they are playing in the center league. They are not in the advanced stage. They are just issue statements. They are not leading the process. Even today, African Union was saying that no, it is African solution for African problem. But people they say that African Union is too slow. They are not able to come up with any something that useful. So we are now almost heading to the end of the third year of this crisis, but we have not seen a good experience of the African Union or regional organization engaging credibly in these conflicts. Unfortunately, some of our regional organizations also polarized because of the funding. So who are funding you? Sometimes you also set the agenda. So some of those organizations also have challenge with the funding, so they have to go through the those who are to mainstream their own agenda with those who are supporting their supporting them. So this is a very complicated picture, and always say in the conflict resolution we always say that it's better to do whatever possible before the conflict starts, because when the conflict starts you don't know where the solution come from, and it will take time. The average conflict in Africa it is between 5 to 7 years. This is at the best. Yeah, we have seen the same situation in Mozambique. Situation started now. We have big crisis in Mozambique. The same problem, and this center privilege linkage. People always acknowledge these issues of the governor failure at the last moment. Those are so the historical manifestation linked together with the power struggle during the transition has fueled the conflicts emotionally between the regions, between other actors, between all this. So the people have a reason to play around different flag on to these conflicts with no clear end, unfortunately.
If you've just joined us, we are with you on a national webinar and simulcast that's hosted by the United Ulama Council of South Africa. And we are in conversation with Professor Saifuddin Dawood Abdul Rahman. He's a Sudanese economist from the Debus Group. And we welcome audiences this evening on Radio Islam International, the Voice of the Cape, IFM in Port Elizabeth, CI Radio Al Ansar in KZN, Sirius FM on the East Rand, and Salam Media as well in South Africa and across the world. Professor, the details that you've given us so far just give us an understanding of the complexity of the situation. And when we look for solutions, um, if it's so difficult to characterize this conflict, and if there's internal fissures and external interference, uh, it's easy to be able to talk to the world about a injustice where there's a clear aggressor, whether that aggressor is the Hindutva in India or the Myanmar regime or the Israeli regime. But when there's such complexity in a situation like Sudan, it does not absolve humanity of their responsibilities to Sudan, but how does one truly present this to the world when there is so much complexity? How would you frame global responsibility when there are so many moving parts to this crisis?
As also as a regional advisor, I work in this region for many years, almost now 15 years in the region, the whole of Africa and also West Africa. We have two group of countries. We call them orphan countries and donor-like countries. Some countries, whatever they have done, immediately you will find that there's a solutions without naming those countries. They will always, the international community will rush to help and settle everything. But there are some countries, unfortunately, like Sudan, it's always the conflicts will take time. Misinformation will continue like that. Those who are actors, even our own organization in the continent, they shy to announce or to name those fueling the conflict. Till today, I have seen a statement by Peace and Security from the African Union. They are not able to name who's are fueling the conflict, despite the fact that there's good reports who's fueling both sides and whatever from the United Nations, from other credible international organizations. So, in my own view, if Sudanese themselves they are not able to come together, that will be a very big challenge. So you allow the space for the interference to continue. Secondly, if our regional organizations also they are not very well strong enough to say what's supposed to say and lead the process and lose the credibility, so our regional organization now they are losing trust. There is a very big trust gap between the citizens and our regional organizations. What is next? Countries like South Africa, for example, Nigeria, Libya before during Gaddafi time, currently Egypt trying to play this role. The big five, we call them in Africa the big five, if they can play a significant role, bringing those leaders, bring those guys together and try to set up the conflicts, we don't need foreign interference because what is the foreign interference they do? We have seen the case between Rwanda and DRC. It is just the same agreement that could be broken by any African countries that's supposed to put heart on that. So we are losing that kind of face in our own continent in terms of the good players. We hope that we have a very good countries that who can play significant role to broker because they are closer, they are near to the heart, they know more. People will not feel that there is a kind of vested interest that will lead the negotiations or the dialogue. So Sudanese dialogue must also accompanied by a very strong regional support. Those regional organizations must also play not only the devil role, as we say, but also to play a role that people will see. These empty statements in Twitter, nobody even now these days better with what this organization is doing. So that you can see the complexity of the conflicts, the historical injustice, together with political marginalizations, is a lesson for other countries not to go through to try to cope with all this. We have seen the same other war is brewing in the region with the same issues coming, and as if that we don't have a short memory to learn from this crisis.
In terms of blame, Doctor, would the predominant narrative, looking at apparently the scale of the crimes, puts primary responsibility or the most serious responsibility on the RSF and the United Arab Emirates as a backer. And obviously, when the United Arab Emirates features, it's not only people are not only looking at Sudan in isolation, but they're looking at the toxic role that the UAE has played in many other conflicts and its stance towards the Israeli entity and so forth. Would you agree with that characterization that amidst all the blame, the United Arab Emirates and the RSF need to take the bigger share of this, of the blame and the responsibility, and therefore face the greater degree of scrutiny and accountability?
You know, I was in a seminar with the World Bank in Washington D.C. and there is a very interesting question from one of our colleagues. He asked a Nigerian manager. He told him that you have presented to us everything is perfect from communication to agriculture, and then he told him that what shall we do? He told him that simply, if you are not prepared, don't come to us and you feel that the World Bank will solve your all problems. What happened in Sudan is the divisions and then the polarizations. UAE, in what we call it in terminology, is causal denial. They don't want to acknowledge that, but the report has shown it's clear the links and everything there. And everybody ask a very simple question: what is UAE want from Sudan that they cannot get it formally between from Sudan and others? And we go for this kind of the brutal war. I have seen, I was following the Twitter for after the events and the crisis and the tragedy in Al Fashir. It's a terrible. I always ask myself the cost of the repetitions and the engagement in such kind of the conflicts. What is the value that a country like UAE, beautiful country, that they get by engaging in this kind of brutality and unhuman conflicts? The same thing, RSF, we always ask. I'm from Darfur region myself, and I always talk to different groups in the political arenas, and I will always tell them that if you don't have morality in the politics, don't go to the politics because people will not vote for violence. People vote for more political and moral leaders. So as you are a politician, you have a social capital. The social capital is based on your morality. You cannot slaughter people like rats, and then you're assuming that people will come and clap for you and to come and lead them on that. So this foreign interference, even the neighboring countries, sometimes they are not helping. But you see what happened. I just give you a simple example. Instead of neighboring countries to come and try to help the conflict, sometimes they're fueling the conflict. And actually, that's the case. Between Sudan and South Sudan, we have the pipeline, for example. The oil pipeline from South Sudan goes through all the way to the Port Sudan. And many times this pipeline was stopped. And South Sudan in deep financial and economic crisis. This crisis trickled down to Uganda because South Sudan, they buy most of their goods to Uganda. and also trickle down to other countries. So you can see the multiplier effects of crisis in one country can harm and have a negative impact in multiple countries in the region. And that's why we need a new thinking in the continent. But sadly, this new thinking is not there so far, and we are only trying through our own intellectual capacity to try to convince people to shift from these short-term gains to have more sustainable peace. Because if your house from glass, you don't throw other by stones, and this is always happening in our beloved country.
Thank you so much for the doctor. What I need to, as we move towards a kind of direction that needs to be given to people. Obviously, the discussion so far gives us a clear indication of the complexities that are involved, and those complexities should not be papered over in trying to find solutions or advocate for solutions relating to Sudan. Just one more question before we really put it on South African responsibility, Muslim responsibility, Ummah responsibility. The fissures that have occurred in Sudan over the years. Many have spoken, just as entities seek the division of countries in the Middle East, seek the division of Syria, for example. There's been long-standing questions or long-standing discussions about the desire of external players to divide Sudan that had already occurred, but a desire to divide it yet further into smaller entities. If you can talk to us about that, and if you could talk to us about uh, any Israeli role in Sudan, or any Israeli designs in Sudan prior to this conflict as well as during this conflict.
In 2011, I met with the former vice president from South Sudan, and Mr. Joseph Lagu is from South Sudan. He also signed agreement in 1972. It's called Addis Ababa Agreement with late former President Jafar Nimeri. And I asked him the same questions. What is the role of Israeli in Sudan conflict? And he laughed and he told me in 1983 when we formed, at that time the rebellion movement called it Anyanya. And he told me Sudan was in a very difficult economic situations, and we are pushing as a rebellion from South Sudan very hard. We receive support from Israel. And he told me one interesting thing is that Jafar Nimeri, late president, met with the former prime minister of Israel, Sharon, and they agreed that Sharon, he told him, there was, I don't know, you remember Musa, this, let's call it Musa operation, based on your name. This was moving the Jews, it's called them flashy Jews. At that time, they came from the great drought hit the Horn of Africa in 1983, 85. They moved from Ethiopia to Sudan. And Israel, they want those people to go to them there. So the agreement was that Sudan will, with the former president, facilitate this information. Many people don't have it. Sudan will facilitate their travel, and Israel will stop supporting the SPLM, the army movement in South Sudan. And he told me they kept that promise, and that's what exactly happened. This is this is story from the vice president, the former vice president, Joseph Lagu. The Israel role in the continent is always there, not only in Sudan. So either through arms or through their intelligence or through whatever, you will find always there is a way. Even our former, even the head of the military, he was in Uganda. He met with the with the Netanyahu during the transitional period. It seems that as if there was a competition between the military and the RSF, and the military and the civilians, to who's going to win the Israel heart. if I can put it that way. So there was a competition between the actors themselves to meet with the top official Israeli to see how they can everybody back himself with that side. The civilians they have not done anything. They said that this is a very serious, and we have to do it through the parliament. We don't have elected parliament, and we have to do it through that. So the military they took advantage, so both sides of the RSF and SAF, they have the desire. If they have not even met with them, but they have a desire, and there was no doubt about that. So it's a very mixed picture, Musa.
Indeed, Doctor. I've got two final questions, and our time is unfortunately running out. But this is an introductory discussion, and we hope for it to be as comprehensive as possible. So, the question is, what do ordinary Sudanese want, and what would a credible settlement, in your opinion, require? How would we achieve a credible settlement?
Sudanese, there are three issues. First, the war must stop. All the war in this world is stopped by negotiations. The war must stop by negotiations. And when you have this kind of war like what is going on, a brutal war like this, there must be a lasting solution, sustainable peace agreement that supports the solution so that we don't have again we go through the same. In the discussion now we are talking about, we don't want, we have seen the previous peace agreement. All those previous peace agreements, they are focusing in power sharing protocols. This time around, our all discussions as intellectuals, the political parties, what we are trying to help them is not to having a power sharing peace agreement, but rather have a credible peace agreement. Ceasefire should not become as a way of mobilizing more arms for the two parties to start another war. The issues are not difficult. The issues are very simple. It is all about inclusive politics, about how the governance should be formed in the country. And this is required discussions in the country, elections. And I think many countries, they have a very good experience to go through that. There is no good courage, I can tell you, between all actors, between the two actors. If you are saying that we stop the war, if you are civilians, now you say that let us stop this war, then you are considered part of those who are somehow in relation with the RSF. If you say let us try just no stop, no, we should not stop this war and we continue until you finish the RSF, then you are part of the Islamist group, who are many people believe they are backing the military. So you can see this division and this polarization to the extent that's affecting, even when you say let us stop the war, this is also a message that means that safe or others they are in the line with other groups. But that is actually not the case. We should not be putting people across this kind of parallel lines, either or, neither nor. No, that is not always the case. Civil war leave deep scars, hurting people, leave deep tragedy. People will not forget. We have seen the experience of civil war in many ways. Myself, my family now is scattered in many countries. You can imagine that it's a very serious pain. But despite all this, peace must come. And that peace, people need to come with it with a good heart. And that's what the civilians they try to do. But the civilians they don't have power, in fact, between the two sides. And that's why I'm saying countries like South Africa, countries with a very high credibility, they can step in and really try to
Mhm.
push people to see how they can help.
And lastly, Doctor, but obviously very, very importantly, uh, when it comes to, again, a conflict, I'm just, because it's so fresh in our memory, just drawing those parallels, when we see what the genocide that occurred in Gaza, there's a clear strategy of what is required, what the Palestinians tell the world to do, whether it is boycott, whether it is humanitarian aid, whether it is sanctions and the like. Are you able to tell us, people want to do something, in just a few quick points? What is it that the ordinary person, a member of the Ummah, ordinary Muslim around the world should be doing for Sudan?
If you look, we go back to, sorry, if you go back to 1990s in Afghanistan crisis at that time, I remember I just first year at the university, I saw one of a newspaper. It's very simple saying, uh, the majority is it is just a curve. The majority of the support was coming to Afghan from Christian countries. أيرضيك هذا, they say that as a Muslim, you believe on that. What is your take on that? So this is the same happening now. If you look to the big machineries, humanitarian actors, you find only maybe Saudi Arabia as the major, bin Salman Center, that they are major player in this. If you look to the African continent, I have not seen even a single plane maybe come to Sudan that just to say solidarity with the Sudanese. If you look to the Muslim community at large globally, because they are in fragmentations and they have their own thinking about what is happening in Sudan. And that's sometimes hurting. But the good thing that the Sudanese themselves are very resilient society, social protections, humanitarians, even acknowledge that the UN that during the whole crisis, the Sudanese themselves have played significant role in terms of humanitarian assistance, in terms of supporting their own extended families, and we believe in our families and extended families. So it was a job for every Sudanese. My message here is very simple. Islamic relief should split, should take over, because also the global geopolitics also sometimes sending negative messages to those. But we have a very good Islamic organizations in UK, Islamic Relief, and all those. They are receiving money from all different actors, bin Salman and all those. So there is also a fear of to be labeled by a terrorist or you be labeled by other means. So that's why we see kind of humble contributions of those organizations.
Indeed, I'd like to thank you profusely for joining us and fielding all our questions on this special simulcast. Dr. Speaking, sharing the aspirations of ordinary Sudanese, and also educating us to be able to perhaps be much more informed in our responses. I thank you so much, and we pray intensely amidst all the other responses for peace to reign in Sudan, and Sudan to be able to fully achieve all that it has been capable of and will be capable of as a great African and Muslim nation. Shukran, and thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you very much, Mr. Musa. And it's indeed, and you, as a Sudanese, you always, between the tragedy, always there is a hope. And a young generation of the Sudanese, they are very hopeful to transform the country. Indeed, I hope that my intellectual and thinking that has helped your listener and your followers.
Indeed, we've been in conversation with Professor Saifuddin Dawood Abdurrahman. He's a Sudanese economist and he's the MD and chief economist at the Davis Group. And he's been our special guest over these past few moments on this webinar and simulcast that's been hosted by the United Ulama Council of South Africa. And we thank our audiences who have joined us for this broadcast across South Africa and across the world, indeed, on CI Radio IFM, Voice of the Cape, Radio Islam International, Al Ansar Radio, Sirius FM, and Salam Media. I'll leave you with this, that we should not blame anyone else when we ask why nobody's talking about Sudan, when we ourselves barely have been talking about it, when we barely know about Muslim communities beyond our own, when we don't even care enough to take a few minutes out of our day to browse stories that affect Muslim groups around the world. So let us be part of the solution by ensuring that we take a closer interest in the affairs of Muslims in our localities and beyond, and then share our findings with family and friends, lobby politicians to raise issues in parliament, and just stay interested in how Muslims are doing wherever they are. This has been a special Uucsa webinar brought to you across nationwide community broadcasters. Jazakumullah khairan for joining us. From myself, Ibrahim Musa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.